How's it going, everybody? I want to welcome you back to another episode of King Sales, the podcast where we help you transform trauma into triumph. Today, I have a very special guest joining me. She is a licensed social worker. She's a proud member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, and she's a trailblazer and pioneer when it comes to being an advocate for marginalized communities. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you guys to Miss Jasmine Lightburn.
Yay. Thank you, Rex. I'm so happy to be on here. Happy to talk with you. Thank you for inviting me. It's honestly an honor and a pleasure to speak with you on this platform. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you on here. I think you're more than qualified and you
Uh,
definitely have a story to tell. So, welcome.
Thanks.
So let's jump right into it. In relation to your career, what kind of got you into social work? Like, was that always your end goal when you were in college?
Yeah, so not at all. It's funny because I took a complete turn in terms of my academic career. I knew that whatever I wanted to do, I knew that I wanted to like my job. So I wanted to do something that I would like. And I knew it became more apparent to me probably in high school that um, I began to think a lot about vulnerable communities, marginalized populations. Like that became something that I really thought about a lot in high school. So I knew that I wanted to help communities who needed help. And so I didn't know exactly how I would go about it, but I knew I wanted to work with kids and that I wanted to help. And so I actually started out academic wise with a major in business management and nonprofit studies, with the mindset of me being able to start my own nonprofit, specifically tailored to helping underserved children. I thought that taking a more macro level approach to the work would be best suitable for me. I didn't think I could handle, um, you know, doing therapy and being more clinical in my work with kids. But as I went through the program and as I really processed and reflected on the feedback from mentors and other people who were doing the work that was attractive to me, I found that social work was more in align with what my passion is. And so I kind of made that change from a business major in undergrad to a social work major for my master's program, and now work as a therapist clinically with kids. So
Quite the journey.
yes.
So amidst like, you know, because you finished undergrad with your business management degree, right?
Yeah.
At what point after you graduate did you realize, okay, maybe this isn't what I should be doing?
Yeah. So I realized that before I graduated, but it was too late. And so I was like, I'm not about to graduate late. We're gonna get this degree and we're gonna keep it pushing. So I realized that towards the end of my undergraduate years, so like my senior year. But again, by that time, it was too late to switch majors. I was like, I've come this far. Let me just finish strong. And so around that time, when I was applying for grad schools, which was my last year of undergrad, the grad schools I applied to were more in line with my passion. And so yeah, it was probably by my senior year, I just kind of finished up the business major, but I knew what I was getting into after that. So
Very nice, very nice. How has the transition after graduating from grad school, has it been like smoother than you expected, a little bit harder than expected?
there's ups and downs. I mean, I'm definitely blessed and thankful to have been able to find a really good job and get the experience that I'm getting now. But it's hard. Like it's really hard. And the work, I mean, again, right? I initially didn't think that I would be able to do what I'm doing now in terms of like working with kids clinically and meeting one on one and having therapy sessions with individuals and with groups. And I thought it would be too taxing emotionally and it would weigh me down too much. And I kind of reframed my mindset and told myself to go for it. And so now I'm doing it and I am staying afloat, but there are days that are pretty tough. So I would say the transition I think there's good and bad, right? There's good and bad, but I know that ultimately I can at least be confident in the fact that like I know that I'm doing what my assignment on this earth is to do. Like I feel confident in that. So
That's awesome. Not many people, especially your age, are able to. I will say our age, really don't have I guess the conviction to go after the things that they're passionate about because we hear from our parents or our elders and they're like you have to go to school, get a degree, get a good paying job, and don't worry about all the rest, just focus on chasing the bag.
right.
And now, like, we're both realizing it now, the most rewarding things aren't that well paying at first, but when you're passionate about it, one thing I love about it is God will provide like what you exactly it is that you need in order to prosper. So, um, after reading a little bit about your bio and hearing the lovely introduction that you just did, it's funny how things kind of just lined up, and now you're in a setting where you're helping marginalized youth in communities that you wanted to make an impact by starting your nonprofit. So, how's that been?
Yeah, I mean, it's really been amazing. I mean, I feel so obviously I'm working in a community that I grew up in. So I feel very connected to the kids that I work with. And I know not to say that I wouldn't have that connection elsewhere, but it's different, right? When you're working in a community that you're familiar with, that you have memories yourself as a child in. And so I think that it makes the connection so much stronger, which on one hand, I think it motivates me in a different way in my work. But I think it also makes it harder because it hits home. And when when you hear the stories of these kids and these families that I work with, it just it resonates a little bit differently. And so I think managing boundaries in that sense is
Mhm.
important, like just for me to continue to do the work. But I think, overall, I enjoy it so much. And again, I feel that I wouldn't want to work in a setting that I'm not passionate in. And so I know that I'm in the right place when I can sense and be aware of the passion when I go to work. And that's where I'm at right now. So
Love that for you. That is great. So I was doing a little bit of research beforehand, and I didn't, we hear it and we see it, but like when the stats are in front of you, it's kind of alarming. Um, Research shows that there's a correlation between socioeconomic status and mental health disorders. And a study that was conducted in Brazil back in 1982 found that the prevalence of mental health disorders by age 30 increased as the socioeconomic status decreased. So in your field of work, after hearing that statistic, like do you see like that correlation in some of the children that you work with?
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I think again in part of my work in this field and I really really strive to be an anti-oppressive therapist and bring that understanding of how these systemic issues affect the kids that I work with. So absolutely, I would absolutely say that yes. I mean, I think in underserved communities and historically marginalized communities there is a gap in terms of the mental health challenges that a lot of the families that I work with face. And I speak a lot with therapists who work in other districts outside of the city of Syracuse who are maybe less diverse, who have more money, and it is very different. And it's amazing to hear that. And I do acknowledge that and speak on that in my work because I think it's important. I think there's just again poverty is traumatic. Living in poverty can be traumatic. And so I think that the pressure and the stress that a lot of the families that I work with live in on a day to day is just an added layer of trauma, an added layer of stress that affects their mental health. And so, not to mention all of the other systemic issues, racism, all these other issues that a lot of the families that I work with have to deal with, I think it absolutely makes sense to me that their mental health is at a higher risk than those who have less of these systemic pressures to deal with.
Very insightful. I think sometimes too, we'll it's one thing to hear about it, but like when you're actually face to face to it as you're experiencing now, it's a whole different ball game.
Mm,
Um, and with obviously dealing with such a harsh environment, how are you able to manage your mental health with, after, because you're dealing with that what you're working 5 days out of the week
yeah.
and you're face to face with it all 5 days out of the week. So
Yeah.
how are you managing your mental health to make sure that, it doesn't negatively impact your work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I mean, yeah, it's hard, right? You're as a therapist, you are the gatekeeper of a lot of trauma, a lot of secrets, a lot of dysfunction and stress within individuals and within family systems. Because especially in working with children, not only do you work with the child, but especially younger children, usually parents are a lot more involved, and so you do a lot of work with the family as well. And so
Uh,
you every day children are unloading on you, but also parents and families. And so there is a lot, but I think that um I think there's a couple things in regards to managing my mental health. For one, I know that in order to last and not get burnt out, I have to take care of myself. And I want to be able to do this for a decent amount of time. I don't want to just do it for a few years and be like, I can't take it anymore. So if I want to be able to do it for a long time, I know that like it's important. And so I'm well aware of that. I know awareness is one thing and actually following through is another thing, but it starts with awareness. And so I'm aware of that and I keep that at the forefront of my mind. Secondly, I mean, I know, people talk about work-life balance a lot. I like to say work, rest, rhythm. And so I just get into a rhythm of working and resting and working again and resting again. And that works for me. I take breaks, I leave work at work. I rest when I come home. And all of the things like, I was just talking about how like self-care, of course, it's like the comforting things, like relaxing, and then it's also the things that take work and trying to do both of those things and make sure that you're staying on top of it. I think it's really just discipline and commitment to that. But again, I think knowing that I want to do this work motivates me to stay well so that I can do it.
Very well said. So prioritizing you time is
Yeah,
essentially how you're able to manage it.
absolutely, absolutely. It's a mindset. I think we all know the things we have to do, but until you have that mindset shift, you may not follow through. So yeah.
And speaking on that, it's so funny because literally this past week in church, the preacher was mentioning the importance of having the right perspective, because if we don't have the right perspective, our perception will be off. And
Yeah.
although something might seem right to us, that everyone else will perceive it as wrong. And so like if you don't have the right perspective and are able to, like you said, take a step back and find that good work rest rhythm, you're eventually you're gonna burn out.
Mhm.
And I actually want to take a step back real quick and go back to something that you had mentioned earlier about being a anti-oppressive therapist. Um, so I'm actively taking some classes right now for grad school for a clinical mental health counselor degree. And it's so funny because in class a couple weeks ago we were learning about the importance of not developing a codependent relationship with your clients and developing autonomy. So obviously the target demographic that you work with, they're young, they're impressionable, but how are you able to essentially develop a good work relationship to foster autonomy so that they can work through their problems and problem solve on their own?
Yeah, yeah, that's a really important question. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is boundaries. My role as a therapist, and even with working with young kids, It's not to tell you how to think. It's not to tell you what's right and wrong. You have parents and teachers and family members and caregivers that do that. So I don't pass judgment on behavior. I allow that space to remain judgment free despite how terrible or how bad or how crazy the things that kids do and say may be. I don't pass judgment, and that fosters autonomy by framing questions and framing activities that force kids to reflect and think and come to their own idea and decision about how to move forward. And I think it's having an idea that I truly believe in the framework that supports the idea that every child will inherently want to make the right decision and will inherently want to do good. And I think if you believe in that, then you allow kids the opportunity to actually make the good choice without um, forcing them to by your own judgment. And knowing that, kids are so impressionable and that I am a figure in their life who they may look up to and who they really take my words to heart. I try to say very little and I allow them to arrive at their own understanding at their own time and just maintaining that child-centered perspective of allowing them to really take control of the session. It's their session, and I support in the healing process, but I don't get them there by myself. I'm just kind of pushing them along their healing process.
I like that. Just you're essentially operating as a guide for them. Like
Exactly.
I'm here to listen to you and then provide you with the necessary advice and guidance based off of what you just told me.
Right, right. And I wouldn't, and it's funny because I don't even know that I would call it advice. I really see it as just an opportunity to explore your thoughts and your feelings. That's really how I see therapy because I mean, I don't see myself as someone who's like I believe that people know themselves the best. And so I always say, like, who am I to tell you what to do or tell you how to live, even with kids, which I know some people think that's crazy, but I really take that perspective of, I try my best not to give advice. I will give feedback, I will give input when appropriate, for clinical purposes, but I really, really allow kids to arrive at their understanding themselves and just remember that, again, a kid will never feel fully accepted if my intent is to change them. And so my intent is never to change them, but for them to find the motivation in themselves to make change.
Man, I love this. This is really good information. And I think that people that'll tune in will be able to get some valuable information no matter what age they are because
Yeah.
it's applicable, right?
Mhm.
As we grow, we're constantly changing and evolving and learning new things, not only about the world, but about ourselves. And so in order for us to maximize that, you just have to be in a place where one, acknowledging and accepting where you're at, but
Mhm.
two, also being open enough and vulnerable enough to accept that change.
Right, right. Exactly.
So one thing that stood out to me when you were talking earlier was the importance of listening and not just trying to, figure out the problem and then get straight to the solution because it's not so straightforward, especially
Mhm.
in this particular field that we're in.
Yes.
So, knowing that, how how have you been able, not to say that you were the type of person to, just force your opinion and answers on people, but like how is being in the position that you're in right now help to guide you to be more of an active listener and more and less of a like a active talker, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting because I think that I am naturally a listener. Like
Mhm.
I am not a talker. I'm very introvert. I don't talk to people a lot. So I think it was easy to slip into this role as listener because even before I became a therapist, that was the role that I took with friends, with family, with people that I was just meeting. Like I think I truly believe I'm a natural listener. And so I think that's helped me. However, I think in therapy, it takes it, you kind of take it up a notch. You take it to the next level because not only are you listening as kids are speaking or as your client is speaking, but you're also like analyzing and assessing. Like you have your, we say like we have our antennas up and we're like watching everything. You're very attentive in that moment. And that's also why it can be kind of draining. But when you're in session, you're noticing everything from body movements to eyes twitching to fingers moving and legs tapping to the tone of their voice to different ways that they pronounce words to where their eyes go to how they are moving to what they how they pivot in conversation. So it takes it, the active listening that you do when you're just casually with friends or family is one thing, but I think in session it's like times 10. Like you're really engulfed and fully present in that moment with the client to be able to provide appropriate therapeutic services in that session.
Very insightful.
Yeah.
It's not, I think for me is, and this is something like I've learned through going through my own counseling. Sometimes I have to learn how to take a step back and really like actively listen because I'm the problem solver. So I've always been the problem solver for my friends, for my family. And so like I'll listen to what it is that you're saying. And as you're telling me, like my brain's working to figure out how to get to a solution. And being in the classes that I'm in right now, I'm realizing I'm like, oh, okay. I probably shouldn't do that as much. And it's something that I'm actively working on how to unlearn.
Mhm.
Um, but also too, like it can definitely be helpful with helping to guide someone through whatever it is that they're going through.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there's a time and place for all of that. And it's funny because I think like I was mentioning, I'm a natural listener. That's kind of just my style in general. However, I think I've had to push myself to give feedback and to give input because I don't typically do that. And so, in order sometimes to be able to motivate change or to be able to support clients through different challenges, it is necessary to provide feedback and input based on what they're saying. And I think me being so caught up in wanting to be a listener has caused me to kind of bite my tongue a little bit.
Mm,
And that's kind of something that I'm working on is again, therapists have to find that balance. Of course, yes, I would argue that it is typically mostly listening when you're in therapy as a therapist. However, there are times where a therapist's feedback and input are very impactful in the course of treatment and the changes that clients make in helping to provide new and different perspectives. And so I think that I'm like, that's something that I'm currently working on is being more comfortable finding my voice in a way that's non-judgmental but supportive to therapeutic goals.
okay, nice.
Yeah.
Um, I I wanted, as we get to the close, I wanted to go back to the beginning on how we talked a little bit about marginalized communities, and um, you really said something that caught my attention just now about finding your voice with being in the career field that you're in, and one, a lot of the times we're underrepresented working in these marginalized communities. There aren't people that look like you and me that can relate to the kids that look like you and me that are going through the struggles that they're going through based on their 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 social upbringing, their economic upbringing, their racial upbringing, their cultural upbringing. So being in the position that you're in, although you might not be uh surrounded by other people that look like you, how do you utilize the platform and the work that you're doing to make an impact in the field that you're in?
Yeah, yeah. So I just to give context to my school setting, I work in a school that's predominantly Black kids. However, most of the adults, most of the teachers and the school staff are white. Um, Most of the school staff that work there don't live in the city of Syracuse, but the kids do. So there's a disconnect there, right? Um, I acknowledge that representation matters. A lot of my kids have never saw a Black therapist, never met a Black therapist. And so, I mean, I remember my first day, kids like, oh my goodness, you're Black. And I'm like, yeah, I am. Like it was a really cool moment. And so I think I acknowledge that representation really does matter. And even in working with families, I've had families, talk about how challenging it is to find care provided by Black professionals in this area, and the ability to, communicate with families in that way and connect with them in that way. I try my best to utilize that in a way that's supportive of progressing the child's goals and the family's goals, and opening the when I say that, I mean like beginning a conversation around how important these things are, and how to advocate for the things that they need, and how to, support them in finding resources from professionals of color, Black professionals that I'm in network, that I work with, and have networked with. And so I really, really strive to really push for that, in ways that, I think that my position and my identity as a Black woman just allows me to do that in a way that, may be difficult for someone who's not Black. And so I really try and acknowledge that and use that to connect, but also to just build bridges between families and the services that they need.
See, and I love how you ended that off. You really are working as a bridge between the community that you want to work with and the field that you're working in. And when you're able to cultivate those resources from the field that you're working in and bring those into those communities where, one, we might not have access to the healthcare or the resources or the necessary educational materials to show us that mental health isn't something that should be stigmatized. It isn't something that we should be writing off as a taboo. It's amazing. It's probably one of the best things that you can do for yourself because there's so many things that you can uncover and get healed from. Like there's
Mm-hmm.
so many people that are carrying around their trauma, not realizing that they can turn it around into something, a triumphant moment, like them
Right.
overcoming whatever it is that they've been through. So,
Mm-hmm.
keep going, keep doing what you're doing because, you know, as we know, this is a field where you're not going to get a lot of claps, you're not going to get a lot of thank yous, but
Yeah.
the work that you do and the impact and the change that you see on a daily basis, that's enough.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. I appreciate that. And it's true, right? You don't you don't get a lot of applause for your work, but it's shown in other ways, and I definitely, take that to heart. And so yeah, I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you've given a lot of good gems throughout this interview. If you could talk to anyone in the audience that might look like us, that's going through, undergrad or graduate school, or is just breaking out into their career, or is considering going into the field that we're in with, social sciences and human behavioral health,
Mhm.
what piece of advice would you give to them?
Hmm. Um, I have two things. One, because you were talking about healing, we talked about trauma. And I would say, to remember that absolutely healing is always possible. I am a firm believer of that. I think sometimes we think that it's impossible to heal from the things that we've been through, but I would say it's always possible. Um, However, it's difficult to heal trauma that's ongoing. And so I
Mm,
think that as a student or as someone in the field, finding, finding peace within yourself, it begins with removing anything that could be causing trauma in your environment, around you, in your setting, if possible, right? It's not always possible, but I think having that in mind, that, being in a setting that you can thrive is so important. And that could mean like not talking to certain friends or cutting certain people off. And I think, having people in your circle, in your corner, who are there for you is like of utmost importance. So actually, I think I combined my thoughts into that one thing, but I think that the thing that has allowed me to get to where I am today, one of the really important things is the people that support me, my family, my friends, everyone around me who has pushed me and gotten to this point, who has prayed for me, who has believed in me, who has supported me. And so I just feel that that's so, so important to have those people, have good mentors to help you. I think that that's important in this field because there's no way that you know everything the first few years that you're starting out. And so having that support is necessary. So that's what I would say.
Very well said.
Thank
Well,
you.
y'all, it has been a wonderful session. Miss Lightburn, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be here tonight.
Yes, of course. Thank you for having me. This was amazing. And thanks for all you do. I really enjoyed the work that you're doing. And I'm so, so happy and grateful that I was able to join. So thank you.
Absolutely. Well, y'all, this has been another episode of King's Tales, the podcast where we help you transform trauma into triumph. I hope that you're one bit better than what you were before you came on. Remember to share, like, and subscribe to the podcast if you aren't already. There will be links in the description that will allow you the opportunity to connect with Miss Lightburn if you're looking for resources or want to help out the Syracuse community with giving back to marginalized communities. So we're all about giving back and advocating for one another. So I want to thank y'all for tuning in. This has been King Stills. My name is Rex, and I'm signing off.